Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the state of Putin's strategy for Ukraine, consider the views of various experts in trying to determine if the full-scale invasion was the desperate act of a man driven by ideology who thinks his time may be coming to an end, or that of a rational criminal who just got some basic facts wrong. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this is a little bit like the question of Brexiteers in the UK. When the Conservative Party fashioned itself into a larger version of UKIP, it became impossible for any Conservative MP to oppose Brexit. But of course, many of them privately do, so they had to pretend. At this point, there were some MPs who were mad and others who only pretended to be, and it wasn't always easy to tell which were which. And there is a similar vibe about Putin right now. I'll start off by saying that, of course, I'm not an expert on him. I'm not an expert on Russian politics. I'm not an expert on the war of aggression that they are waging. But I have been reading a lot of the opinions of many who are, and they don't always draw the right or the same conclusions, I should say, which means by definition they can't all be drawing the right conclusions. But I'm trying to extract interesting thoughts that could lead us one way or the other on whether the Russian president is a madman whose schemes fell apart when they hit reality, and therefore we probably should be worried about the threat of nuclear attacks, or is he a rational man who just got some things wrong, which he could not reasonably have known at the time, and therefore would probably be unlikely to follow through on his threats on nuclear attacks. Because there are different ways of looking at the situation. Vladimir Putin talks all the time of wanting to create a Russia that dominates the world. You know, we know to ignore his rants about NATO. I think that's fairly settled. They're a device to confuse the gullible in the West, just like Brexit, and it worked a treat. It was designed as a narrative to weaken opposition against him. He has never seen NATO as a serious threat. And he's not really proven to be all that wrong on that front either. After all, NATO, first of all, it's entirely a defensive organisation. It's refusing to directly engage with him. You know, they've bolstered members in the immediate area, but they're not providing military support for Ukraine, not directly. Even going as far as the Americans refusing to help deliver MiGs to Ukraine, that Poland has decided it can donate to the force, but it needs the US to manage the logistics. They are refusing, presumably for fear of escalating the situation. I do not know if they have sound reasons for doing so. I'm not a military strategic expert. But the point is that Putin was not concerned by NATO taking out his army or air force, and he seems to have been proven right. However, he definitely got other things wrong. See, the narrative ran that the Ukrainians would hail the Russian invasion as liberators, the Ukrainian army would lay down their arms, the government would flee, and pro-Russian government would be set up. But the Ukrainian government did not flee, and the people did not lay down their arms. In fact, we have seen no end of footage of ordinary Ukrainian citizens marching on Russian soldiers to give them a piece of their mind. If any Russian invaders believed the lies about being liberators, which many of them may well have done, they have been disavowed of that notion now. Putin did not help himself by sending in conscripts in the first wave. He now denies knowing that conscripts were used, the classic defence of blaming the courtiers rather than the king. He can then scapegoat someone else for what has turned out to be an unpopular move. But it wasn't just using untrained soldiers that was the problem. His entire military is a shambles. Aging Soviet-era equipment, farmers stealing armoured personnel carriers and tanks, whole convoys left on the road stranded with knackered tyres and no fuel. You know, even given that Ukraine will inevitably be exaggerating the number of fuel tankers they've destroyed, bear in mind, it doesn't matter which side you hear accounts of the war from, it's propaganda both ways. It does seem that they have genuinely destroyed a very large number. Essentially, Russia's supply lines are knackered. The logistics has failed utterly. This is why he's now using weapons of mass destruction. He has admitted to using thermobaric weapons. Should be called thermobarbaric. He will use chemical weapons next. And that's not a fear, that's a fact. He's used them against civilians in Syria. The Russian embassy in the UK has been tweeting that Ukrainians are amassing stockpiles of ammonia to use on themselves in order to blame Russia for it. In other words, Russia is preparing the ground to carry out chemical attacks and is going to try and claim that it's Ukraine that's using the weapons against itself, just like they tried to claim that Ukraine was shelling itself about a week ago. But this is the action of a madman, isn't it? Maybe, but it could also be the action of a rational thief. The inhumanity doesn't help us. You can see it as the actions of a madman. After all, why order a full-scale invasion of Ukraine when it was far too large for the Russian military to conquer or occupy? Is it because he's nearly 70? He feels the hand of time on his shoulder? What if he knows he's in poor health? For all we know, he's been told he's got 6 months to live. Or maybe he just feels the signs of aging and a paranoid megalomaniac inflates the discomfort to mortal levels. Was this a desperate act that wasn't rationally considered? It can certainly look like that. But then I've seen explanations that could make the invasion look entirely rational. Even though with hindsight, a complete pig's ear has been made of it. See, let's look at where he went wrong. First of all, it's reasonable to suppose that he did not realise that Ukraine and its government would be so stubborn against an overwhelming Russian force. Remember, that force was amassing for a very long time. You know, if the government had fled, he may have been able to march on Kiev with limited resistance and install a puppet government. After all, on a smaller scale, this has worked in the past. It's not like the rest of the world was saying, oh, of course Zelensky would stay and fight. After all, Putin may have seen this invasion in the same mould as the Nazi invasion of France. Yes, there would be resistance. He'd accept there will be resistance, but he's cool with that. He doesn't actually need Ukraine as such. He doesn't need Ukraine to be stabilised, really. He just wants to avoid having a pro-European power on his doorstep. He wants control of it, and the kleptocrat in him also wants to nick a load of Ukraine's industries. It's just money. And Ukraine is massive. Huge potential to be a powerful nation as an EU and NATO member. That's not what he wants politically. Second big error, and this was the massive one, wasn't it? The piss poor state of his military. Only a madman would have launched a full-scale invasion with this decrepit and untrained force. Why didn't he just try and slice a bit more off Ukraine? You know, he'd gotten away with doing that in the past. You know, the West was never going to go mad like it has done now over just nicking a little bit more. People thought that's what he'd probably do. Well, it's possible that he thought his military was in much better shape. You know, we're assuming here that he must have known that his military was actually more show than capability. But it turns out plenty of money has gone into modernising the Russian military, from what I've seen reported. Loads of money went into it. Putin really tried to get it fit for purpose. It's just that a lot of the money disappeared in corruption. The money has now been seized by European countries in the form of super yachts belonging to Putin's oligarchs. It was pointed out that military advisors were hardly going to go and tell Putin that you know, the money was all being siphoned off. So they just told him, oh yeah, things are going brilliantly. Oh yeah, we're modernising. It's going to be amazing. You wait and see. You wait and see. Putin may well have believed he had a modern military machine ready to roll. If so, then the invasion doesn't look quite so insane. Actually look plausible. The third mistake was in believing that the Western powers would huff and puff but essentially do nothing. This view was solidified after the West huffed and puffed but essentially did nothing in the past, including with the beginning of this invasion, which took place 8 years ago. The resources required to have prevented the initial incursion into Ukraine would have been mild. It would have been very low risk for the West, but it didn't do it. So it's easy to see how a rational Putin might well imagine that powers that could not be bothered to make a small effort to prevent him ever establishing a foothold in Ukraine would commit to the much more aggressive measures needed to stop him carrying out the largest military campaign in Europe since the 1940s. It was also pointed out that he will have observed the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and maybe concluded that the West is both incompetent and maybe so reluctant to get involved with foreign conflicts that it rushed out much quicker than should have done. In fact, I could add that the US withdrawal from Afghanistan was clearly a sign of them wanting to divert resources away from Europe and towards their current concerns in Asia and the Pacific. Yes, I know Afghanistan is not in Europe, but the fallout from it, you know, descending into chaos of Taliban control does affect Europe. Basically, European powers did not want to abandon the country. Now, obviously, Putin got things wrong. He may have overestimated the strength of his own forces due to lies from his advisors. He failed to foresee the resolve of the West to prevent the fall of Ukraine. Let's be honest, the resultant action has surprised a lot of people. Who of us foresaw the resolve from countries in the West that we have been seeing? Putin also underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainian people to defend their lands. But none of these misjudgments were necessarily born of madness. You know, they were all possible mistakes to make for an intelligent, rational leader. Even now, his actions, though monstrous, are rational. He can't win this war now by conventional means. His ground forces are knackered. If Ukraine ever gets the planes it needs to defend its skies properly, his entire operation is in serious jeopardy. It's probable that it already is. He cannot now take Ukraine with normal conventional military means. He cannot afford a protracted war of attrition either, because his oligarchs are losing money hand over fist. Make no mistake, this invasion is not about some fantasy vision of Russia. That's just how he sells it to his own people. It's because this criminal cartel needs more money. Controlling even a third of Ukraine means having access to at least tens of billions of dollars of industry for them to steal. It's a heist. And he needs to keep stealing in order to remain head of the cartel. He cannot simply commit more forces to the war because he's running out. He doesn't have them. So he has to wear down the resistance of the Ukrainian people. This is why he's turned to thermobaric weapons, and he is about to turn to chemical weapons. They are acts of terror designed to cause a mass exodus of those opposed to Russian rule and to break the spirits of those who remain, so that they make the calculation that it is better to accept domination to the horrors that he is unleashing. And this is all against a background of NATO refusing to engage directly by offering to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would mean directly attacking Russian forces or facilitating the transfer of fighter jets to Ukraine. So Putin is currently in a situation whereby the least risky move for him is to escalate. He doesn't fear Western forces taking him on directly. He can't abandon the war because then he looks weak. His oligarchs will have lost a lot of money for no eventual gain. The only reason they're going to stick by him is if they think gain will come, you know, that this is just like wintering at the moment and there's harvest time to come. So the rational leader has to commit. What is needed is for the rational response to be to stop. We need to engineer a situation where the rational response is for him to stop. But in order to do that, the West would have to engage militarily, as far as I can see, as well as economically. So why not do it? Because they're not certain he's rational. He might be mad. Mad enough to use nuclear weapons that he is threatening. A rational leader would not, but a madman might. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.